This is episode 53, and in today's episode, we're going to dive into the topic of how to set healthy boundaries with your in-laws. Now, here is something that we need to mention right up front about boundaries. They're important because what they do is allow us to protect our time, our energy, and our mental and emotional health, right? When it comes to in-laws, it can be especially difficult to set boundaries, to say the least, and you may have had your share or is having your share of that very thing as we speak here on this podcast. Now, this is because we often feel obligated to please them, even if it means sacrificing our own needs. But here's what I think it's important to understand is that we are responsible. We're not responsible for our in-laws' happiness. We're only responsible for what? Our own. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by your in-laws, or if you're feeling like they're not respecting your boundaries, this podcast is for you. Now, just a quick reminder, and that is that the Happier Marriage Podcast is on a mission to challenge married professional Christian spouses to take responsibility for their own happiness and provide them with the necessary tools and resources to create a happier and more fulfilling marriage. And I hope that's really what it is you're here for. So even though there are a number of ways you can set healthy boundaries, I'll be sharing with you 5 of the most important ones. So stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to the Happier Marriage Podcast, a podcast for spouses longing to have a happier marriage so they can feel more connected, desired and supported. Now, to start the show, here is your host and Sherpa, licensed marriage and family therapist and certified relationship coach, Kingsley Grant.
Now, before we dive deeper into the topic of how to set healthy boundaries with your in-laws, I want to ask you these 3 questions. Number 1, how have you personally dealt with challenging situations involving your in-laws? Number 2, were you able to resolve it? And number 3, what did you have to do or do you think you need to do to not have the issue be problematic in your own marriage? Now, I want you to hang on to those questions while I share the story of our fictional spouse, Sarah and John, as they will give us some context and possibly see if you can relate to their story. Now, Sarah and John, as you know, have been married for 13 years and they have two children. And when they started to have problems about in the early stage of their relationship, about 5 years or so with Sarah's in-laws. Over time, it has built up. And what happened is her in-laws, her parents, right, which is John's in-laws, they were constantly visiting and were always trying to tell Sarah and John how to raise their children. Now, Sarah and John tried to be polite, but they were starting to feel overwhelmed. They didn't know how to set boundaries with their in-laws without hurting their feelings. One day, Sarah and John had a big fight. Sarah was feeling stressed out and overwhelmed, and John was feeling like he was being pulled between his wife and his parents. Now, I'll share with you what Sarah and John decided to do after the fight. But I'll do so right before I share with you the healthy ways to set boundaries with your in-laws. Now, some of you might be thinking, but isn't it our duty as Christians to honor and respect our in-laws? Now, while that is true, setting boundaries does not contradict honoring your parents or your in-laws, as the Bible does talk about honoring your parents. It doesn't contradict with what it is when you set boundaries. So let's address some of the common objections that might arise when this whole topic of boundary setting with your in-laws come up. For example, someone may say, but my in-laws are family. I don't want to hurt their feelings. Now, it's true that you're their family, but that doesn't mean you have to let them walk all over you, push their own agenda on you and your family. It's important to set boundaries with your in-laws, even if it's difficult. That's what that's what family do, right? Families at times have difficult conversations. The second objection you might be thinking, or someone may think, is this: what if my spouse doesn't agree with me about setting boundaries? Well, here's what I find. I get it, right? But if your spouse doesn't agree with you about setting boundaries, it's important to have a conversation with them about it, right? You want to explain why you feel the need to set boundaries and listen to their concerns, and hopefully you can come up with a compromise that works for both of you. The third objection that a person may have in this area of boundary setting is, but I'm afraid of hurting my in-laws' feelings, right? Now, it's natural to feel afraid of hurting people's feelings, right? That's a natural thing. But it's important to remember that you're not responsible. You're not responsible. Can I say that third time? You're not responsible for their feelings. You can't control how they react or don't react to you setting boundaries. All you can do is control your own actions. That's all you can do, is control your own actions, right? Now, here's what I find. Even though it's natural to have concerns, as I've just said, about setting boundaries, it's important to understand that by doing so, we are actually creating healthier and more respectful relationships with both our spouses and our in-laws. You know, one of the things that I'm so grateful for, and even though my parents and my wife's parents have died, but while they were alive, and we were, of course, married at the time, one thing I can say is that we had healthy relationships. I mean, truly, they were family. And that's really the goal, right? We want to all, quote, get along. And we did. We all got along. We would get together for holidays, for different celebrations, and so on. My parents, unfortunately, didn't have when we got married, it wasn't too long afterwards. My dad died and my mom died many more years later, but we had a good relationship. They never interfered at all. And, you know, in our marriage, and I thank God for that. I thank God every day, because as a therapist, a marriage and family therapist who hears so many stories from so many couples, I find that, I can't be thankful enough, because I hear horror stories. And I'm thinking, man, this is not going to last. Something had to be done. And I would teach my clients about how to set these very things I'm talking to you about, set boundaries, right? But see what happened by taking control of this aspect of your marriage, you can experience greater peace in your family. It can strengthen your bond and your intimacy with your spouse. And what it does, it creates, I believe, a more harmonious environment for your family, because in-laws issue can create toxic moments. It can create tension. You name it, as you may know, if you have one of those relationships with your in-laws. So what are some of the benefits of setting healthy boundaries with your in-laws, right? And I want to talk about some of those benefits right after this.
So the big question is this: how is it possible that you have a happier marriage when you feel like you've tried everything? Your spouse isn't making an effort. You're exhausted. You feel like giving up. Or there's so much hurt that's taken place between you and your spouse. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers.
While marital pressure can be uncomfortable, right, as a result of in-laws issues, it can also present, I believe, opportunities for growth and transformation within your marriage. So here's one of the first benefits I want to share with you about what setting boundaries can do. It can help to protect your time. When you set boundaries with your in-laws, you're essentially saying, I love you, but I need some time for myself, for my family, right? This can also help you avoid feeling overwhelmed and stressed out. So you as the parent, the child of the parents or the in-laws, in this case, maybe say Sarah, is her in-laws, or that's John's parents. John can speak on behalf of the marriage. If it's Sarah's parents, that's John's in-laws. Sarah needs to be the one who speak on behalf of the marriage by saying, Mom, Dad, I truly love you, and you know that. We love one another. But I need to make certain that we create some time for John and I to build on our relationship. And we want to set up some kind of some ways to make that happen. And you can use the word boundaries or just say ways to make that happen. And here are some suggestions you have. So you want to protect your time. Second benefit is it helps you to protect your energy, right? When you're constantly dealing with your in-laws, their needs, it can be draining, as you know very well. It can be so draining. So setting boundaries can help you conserve your energy so that you can focus on your own needs, right? You want to be focused on your own needs, and you don't need to be drained by something that can be managed. And the third benefit is setting boundaries can help you protect your mental and emotional health. When you're constantly feeling stressed and stressed out and overwhelmed by your in-laws, it can take a toll on your mental and emotional health. And you know that. If you're experiencing that, you know that firsthand, the emotional and mental toll it takes on you. So setting boundaries can help you reduce your stress and improve your overall well-being. Would you agree? Okay, I'm glad to hear that you're agreeing with me on that. So when we establish boundaries, we create space for healthier connections. And I believe we also foster, right, an atmosphere of respect. This is very key. We create an atmosphere of respect among everyone, but also of love and also of understanding within the marriage. And also, of course, in this case, the extended family, which are the in-laws. So before I share with you the 5 ways to set healthy boundaries with your in-laws and what Sarah and John could do in their situation, let me ask you to give me about 90 seconds to share some very important information with you, right? So here's what I want to ask you to do. Ratings and reviews are one of the key ways for this podcast to get more attention. And so I ask you to help me to fulfill the mission that we're on, I mentioned before. So rating and review allows this podcast platform, I have a hard time saying that, this podcast platform to gauge the show's importance, and by the reviews and ratings that, you help me to put out there. So you can help me with that. And it's one way for you to show, I believe, your appreciation and gratitude for this podcast that is providing you with a valuable content and helping you in your marriage, all for free. So this is the least I believe that I can ask for you. And I hope that you'll agree with that and make a rating and review. So at the end of this episode, I'll share with you how to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. And I really appreciate you sticking to the end to hear how you can do that in less than 90 seconds. Really, it doesn't take much time to do that. If you have missed any past episodes of this show, let me encourage you to go and binge listen to that. Take this podcast with you when you go for a walk, for a run, I listen to podcasts all the time when I go for walks or runs. In the car, sometimes I don't even have my radio on. So you want to do the very same thing for Happier Marriage Secrets podcast and take me with you. And if you missed any of the past episodes, go to happiermarriagesecrets.com, happiermarriagesecrets.com. You see all the podcasts listed there, or you can also search for that on the podcast platform in which you're listening to the episode right now. And I want to mention that this show is brought to you, right, by kingslegrant.com, kingslegrant.com, where you'll find resources and other services that might be of interest to you. So please pay a visit to that. Again, thank you. Now, let's quickly review the story of Sarah and John. As I mentioned before, that John's parents, that's Sarah's in-laws, they were constantly coming over and they want to have their voice in how they should raise their children. And Sarah and John had a big fight because she had had enough. They had a big fight about this whole thing. And so what they had to do was what I want to share with you today and what would be helpful. So for the rest of the story, as the late Paul Harvey, if you don't know who that is, don't worry. The late Paul Harvey would say, for the rest of the story. So after the fight, Sarah and John decided that they needed to set some boundaries with their in-laws, which is John's parents and Sarah's in-laws. They talked to them about how they were feeling. So John was the one who initiated the conversation and spoke on behalf of the family, of him and his wife, how they were feeling and how he felt about the whole thing. And they began to set some ground rules. John's parents with Sarah's in-laws, they were initially upset, as you can understand, but they eventually understood. They started to visit less often, and they stopped trying to tell Sarah and John how to raise their children. Sarah and John were finally able to relax and enjoy their marriage. They were no longer feeling overwhelmed or stressed out, and they were able to focus on their own needs. And over time, John's parents, Sarah's in-laws, kind of come around, and they were showing up at events that they were invited to, no longer showing up unannounced. So it really, really helped them. And I believe that will help your relationship as well. Now, how do you set healthy boundaries? Number one, you want to first and foremost have a conversation with your spouse, right? You don't want to step over your spouse to go and do this without, especially if you are not the child of the parents, right? So talk with your spouse. So in this case, Sarah and John need to have a conversation, which they did, about the concerns. And Sarah need to explain to John why she feels the need to set boundaries is so critical. And John need to listen to the concerns of Sarah. And hopefully what John and Sarah can do is come up with a compromise that works for both of them, but also they think would work for John's parents. John knows his parents more than Sarah does, and he could gauge and help Sarah to decide what might be a better compromise that they both could come up with. So that conversation need to be had. Second thing that they want to do to set healthy boundaries. They need to understand they're going to have to be assertive, right? Not aggressive. They're going to have to be assertive, but respectful. Assertiveness and respect is going to be a part of this equation. So when you're setting boundaries, it's important to be assertive. Means that you're going to assert yourself, assert what you want, but respectful. It means being clear, very clear about your needs, right? So John needs to be very clear about the needs of his family. And so he's also want to be very mindful of their feelings. I mentioned before that you're not concerned about, you can't control and decide based upon what they may feel. But they want to also take that into consideration that, you know what, it's going to be hard. They're going to feel a certain way, but be okay with that. They have to get over that. They have to work through that. And it's not Sarah and John's concern about the feelings of, to say how, my mom and my dad may feel a certain way. Yes, they will. They will. Get used to the idea. They will feel a certain way. You cannot make your decision based upon that. You must make a decision on this issue as it pertains to your marriage. That is first and foremost, and that's what honors God. And God said in His Word, right, that let no man, no woman, no parents, no family member put asunder what He has joined together. And so if John's parents is going to interfere, they are basically violating what God says. So it's important that you get this across to the in-laws. Number 3, be specific. When you're setting boundaries, it's important to be specific. This means saying exactly what you need, right? Say exactly what you mean and mean exactly what you're saying. Rather than just saying, I need more space. No, that's not enough. That's not clear. You've got to be very specific what it entails. So whatever that you might need to say or John need to say, be very clear. Put dates or times or put bookends around that. Don't leave it for granted that they're going to understand what you mean without being very specific. Number 4, be willing to compromise. It's likely that you'll be able to get everything It's unlikely. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to get everything that you want, right? When you're about to set boundaries with your in-laws. So I want to say, go in with a negotiation mindset. Be willing to make an offer, so to speak, and negotiate what you're willing to settle for. So you may not get all that you want. Your parents, John, may not get all that they want. But the fact is that you can be satisfied that at least you get what it is you're willing to live with, right? Reach an agreement that works for everyone. You're able to get to that point, and that's important. And number 5, so we have mentioned so far, number 1, talk to your spouse, right? Have the conversation. Number 2, be assertive but respectful. Number 3, be specific. Number 4, be willing to compromise. And number 5, be consistent. Once you've set boundaries, this is so key. Once you've set boundaries with your in-laws, it's important to be consistent. This means sticking to your boundaries. The Bible said it this way: let your yes be yes and your no be no. Whatever is less than that, it's sin. So make sure that when you said, this is what we're agreeing upon, stick to your boundaries, even when it's difficult. Because your parents, John, is going to try to test you. They're going to try to test to see how serious you are. Because they may say, hey, that's Johnny, our baby boy. That's Johnny. Because Johnny don't mean that. Maybe you have over the years communicated to them that kind of thing. This is one you're going to have to stick to, John. And Sarah going to have to probably help you, John, to stick to this. But it's important you be consistent. Now, setting boundaries, as you can hear and see with your in-laws, can be challenging. Right? But it's important to remember that you're not alone in this. Number 1, you're prayerfully going to consider this. Ask God to give you wisdom to know how to present this and the right timing. That's important. Here's what I find, that many people who have successfully set boundaries with their in-laws really have come out on the other side to be better off. And the relationships are a lot more healthier all around. And there are resources. You can get someone to help you. Maybe if you want to speak to a professional about how to go about doing this, there are resources available. Whether you can listen to a YouTube channel like mine. Like mine at Kings of Grant. But there are resources out there to help you in this regards. And if you're struggling to set boundaries, again, seek professional help. Now, just want to summarize what I've just said in this episode today. That setting boundaries with your in-laws is important. It protects your time, your energy, and your mental and emotional health, right? There are many benefits I mentioned before in setting boundaries with your in-laws, including reduced stress, improved communication, and a stronger marriage, which is really, at the end of the day, you want to have a stronger marriage, a deeper connection with your spouse. That's paramount in everything I'm saying here. So it's important to be assertive but respectful. Be specific, be willing to compromise, and be consistent with setting boundaries. Again, if you're struggling, don't hesitate to seek professional help. Okay? Now, if you'd like to gauge how well your marriage is doing, especially because of this in-law issue, then you want to take the Happier Marriage Assessment Quiz, which can be completed in less than 90 seconds at happiermarriagesecrets.com/quiz. happiermarriagesecrets.com/quiz. Take the quiz, assess what your marriage is, get the downloadable PDF that explains to you what your marriage is going through and what your next step would be in this area. So I'd like to know your thoughts on anything that I covered today from the start of the show to this point. Let me know. You can do that through Instagram or Facebook, a direct message, and or you can send me an email. But I think on social media, if you're there, just send me, when I post this, just make a comment or direct message me right there, and I'd love to hear from you. Now, about leaving a rating and a review, as simple as this, right? As simple as ABC. Is that go to your Apple Podcasts, search for Happier Marriage Podcast, right? Once that comes up, click on that image, and then scroll down. You'll come across ratings and reviews. Just click the 5-star. I'm happy to make it easier here. Click the 5-star and leave a brief 1-sentence or 2-sentences review on what your thoughts about the show. That's it. That's a rating and review right there. You can do that right now as you are wrapping up this. I'm wrapping up this episode. As you close out, just go ahead and do that rating and review right now. I really appreciate that. Thanks again for listening. And the announcer will tell you how to get a free gift just for staying to the end. Now let's make marriages happier again.
We've come to the end of another exciting show, and if you enjoyed this podcast, 1, make sure you give this show a rating and review. 2, subscribe to the show to get all new releases. And 3, get your complimentary copy of the 5 Secrets to a Happier Marriage ebook at kingsleygrant.com/HMS ebook. Again, it's kingsleygrant.com/HMS ebook. See the link in the show notes. Do it today. Don't delay. Thanks so much for listening, and make sure you tell one other spouse about this show, or better yet, share it with them. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May he turn his face toward you and give you his peace, both now and forever.